I never expected to wake up in a hospital bed, not even remembering the accident that landed me there. 1 minute, I was driving home from work, the next, darkness. It wasn't until I groggily opened my eyes to the blinding white lights and that sterile, antiseptic smell that I realized how bad things were. The first thing I saw when I came to was her, my wife, Amanda, sitting in the chair by the bed, scrolling through her phone, barely noticing that I was awake.
For a split second, I felt a wave of relief.
I figured I was lucky to be alive, and even luckier that she was there for me. But that feeling didn't last long. Her blue eyes, the same ones that used to sparkle whenever I came home, felt different, cold, distant. I tried to convince myself that it was just my foggy brain playing tricks on me. I had been through a lot, and maybe I was reading into things. She had been worried about me, surely. But as the days in that hospital dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At first, Amanda was by my side often enough. She would show up in the mornings with coffee, sometimes stay until late afternoon. But after a week or so, her visits started getting shorter. Her excuses started piling up. "I'm so busy at work, babe. They're really putting a lot on me right now. I need to run home and take care of a few things. Don't worry, I'll be back later." Each excuse was plausible, but the more she said them, the more hollow they started to sound. And when she did visit, her eyes never quite met mine. She'd sit there, tapping away on her phone or glancing at the clock, like she had somewhere else to be. One afternoon, after she left the hospital early again, I finally asked the nurse how long I had been there. "About 2.5 weeks, she said. That hit me. Nearly 3 weeks in the hospital, and yet Amanda seemed more preoccupied than ever. I wanted to ignore the creeping doubt in the back of my mind. After all, I had nearly died. Maybe she was just stressed, dealing with everything while I was stuck in a hospital bed. But late at night, when the nurses were gone, and the hum of machines was the only sound in the room, my thoughts took darker turns. And then came the phone bill. It was something we shared. One of those auto-pay situations where I rarely even looked at the details. But since I was laid up in bed with nothing to do but stare at the ceiling or flip through channels, I decided to check it out, see if I could get rid of some of those annoying spam calls I'd been getting lately. What I found changed everything. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The phone bill showed call logs for both our phones, mine and Amanda's, along with the times and durations. But what caught my eye wasn't the spam calls. It was the number I didn't recognize, and the fact that Amanda had spent hours talking to whoever it belonged to. The timestamps were what really got me. These calls weren't happening during work hours or late at night when I was already half asleep in the hospital. They were happening during those busy times when she claimed she couldn't be there with me. Hours on the phone, at times when she said she was running errands or caught up with work. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a client from work, someone she needed to stay in touch with. Maybe it was an old friend. But something gnawed at me. Amanda wasn't the type to have long, personal calls with anyone. She was always focused on her career, her fitness, and, until recently, our relationship. Yet, there it was, right in front of me. Call after call, each lasting an hour or more, on the days she'd barely shown her face at the hospital. I told myself I'd ask her about it the next time she visited, but a part of me already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. So instead, I did something I'd never done before in all the years we'd been together. I dug deeper. I copied the number down, knowing full well that crossing that line would lead me somewhere I might not want to go. But at this point, I couldn't ignore the warning bells ringing in my head. Something was wrong, and I needed to know. Later that night, when the hospital was quiet, and my thoughts wouldn't let me rest, I ran a reverse lookup on the number. My heart pounded in my chest as the search processed, the seconds ticking by, stretching out like hours. When the results finally popped up, my worst fears started to take shape. The number wasn't tied to any business or work contact. It belonged to someone named Jason. I didn't know a Jason. As far as I was aware, Amanda didn't either, or at least, she'd never mentioned one. But the call logs didn't lie. Over the past few weeks, while I'd been lying in a hospital bed, fighting to recover, Amanda had been talking to this guy almost every day. I felt sick. My mind started racing, going over every interaction we'd had, every excuse she'd made, every moment she wasn't there. And then, a darker thought crept in. What if these weren't just phone calls? What if it was more? I tried to calm myself down, telling myself I was jumping to conclusions. But there was no calming the fire that had started burning inside me. The pieces were starting to fit together, whether I liked it or not. The next morning, Amanda came by the hospital, just like she always did, with that same distant look in her eyes. This time, though, I couldn't look at her the same way. I couldn't even bring myself to ask about the number. Instead, I did something I'd never thought I'd do. I started planning. Once I knew something was going on with Amanda and this Jason, everything about her seemed different. It's amazing how you can spend years with someone, thinking you know them inside and out, and then, in a matter of days, it's like they're a stranger. That's how it felt every time Amanda walked into the hospital room after that. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I played along, pretended like everything was normal, even though every time I saw her, my stomach twisted with anger. I could feel myself holding back words I desperately wanted to say, but I knew I had to be smart. Rushing into a confrontation wouldn't change anything, and I wasn't ready for that blow-up just yet. Instead, I focused on my recovery and started making plans. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. If she had been sneaking around behind my back while I was lying in a hospital bed, the least I could do was turn the tables. The day I got discharged was when everything set into motion. Amanda picked me up from the hospital, and it was a strange car ride home. She talked like nothing was wrong, going on about how relieved she was that I was finally out of the hospital, how things could go back to normal. Normal. That word hit me harder than I expected because I realized there was no going back to normal. Not after what she'd done. I smiled and nodded along, but inside, I was already miles ahead of her. The moment we got back to the house, I knew what I had to do. The place that used to feel like home, warm and familiar, now felt different, almost hostile. Her betrayal had poisoned it. I couldn't stay there, couldn't share a space with someone who had taken advantage of me when I was at my weakest. I started small. First, I transferred my personal savings into a separate account, something Amanda wouldn't notice right away. We had a joint account, but I wasn't touching that yet. That would come later. For now, it was about making sure I had control over my own funds. I wasn't about to let her keep anything that was mine. Next, I started slowly moving things out of the house, just a few items here and there, things that Amanda wouldn't immediately notice. It wasn't easy with my injuries still healing, but I made sure to pace myself. I couldn't afford to raise any suspicions. Every day, after Amanda left for work, I'd make trips, moving my personal items into a storage unit I'd rented under a different name. Piece by piece, I was taking everything that mattered to me out of that house. It felt like I was reclaiming myself, one box at a time. I left behind the things she'd bought, the stuff we'd shared. None of that meant anything to me anymore. But everything that was mine, everything I'd worked for, it was coming with me. This wasn't just about leaving. This was about leaving her with nothing. During this time, Amanda barely noticed. She was too wrapped up in her own world, too focused on whatever was going on with Jason. She still made her excuses, working late, meeting friends, running errands, and I let her. The more time she spent away from home, the easier it was for me to clean the place out without her realizing. The entire time, I played the part of the recovering husband. I acted grateful for her support, even though I knew damn well where her mind really was. I think that was the hardest part, pretending to care, pretending to still be in love with someone who had betrayed me. But I knew it was necessary. I needed time, and I needed to be smart. This wasn't just about leaving her. It was about making sure she felt the sting when I did. As the days went by, Amanda became even more careless. Maybe she thought I was still too weak, too focused on my recovery to notice anything was wrong. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Whatever it was, the cracks were starting to show. It wasn't just the calls to Jason that bothered me anymore, it was the texts. I'd catch glimpses of her phone lighting up at odd hours, and every time, she'd quickly tuck it away or turn the screen over. She thought she was being discreet, but I could see the change in her. She was more distant, more checked out of our life together. The woman I had fallen in love with, the one who had supported me through thick and thin, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't even recognize. One night, while she was in the shower, I finally did it. I took her phone from the nightstand. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, and I felt a weird mix of guilt and anticipation as I swiped through her messages, looking for confirmation of what I already knew in my gut. It didn't take long. There they were, texts between her and Jason, going back weeks. Flirty messages, plans to meet up, even explicit details of what they'd done while I was in the hospital. My stomach turned as I read them, the words feeling like a punch to the gut. They'd met up at his place, at hotels, even at our house while I was stuck in a hospital bed. The thought of it made me sick. The person I had trusted most in the world had betrayed me in ways I hadn't even imagined. And yet, I kept reading. I don't know why, maybe I needed to see just how far it had gone, or maybe I was just torturing myself. But with each new message, the anger in me grew. This wasn't just some fling. She had invested time and effort into this affair, and that stung more than anything. The shower stopped, and I quickly placed the phone back where I'd found it, my heart racing as if I had done something wrong. But the truth was, I hadn't. She had. And now, I had proof. That night, Amanda curled up next to me in bed like nothing was wrong. I felt her body press against mine, warm and familiar, but all I could think about was how she'd been sharing that same warmth with someone else. The anger simmered inside me, but I stayed still, silent. There was no point in confronting her now. I wasn't done yet. The next day, I took the final steps in my plan. I called the bank and arranged to drain the joint account we shared. The money in there wasn't just hers, it was ours. We had built that up together, and I had every right to take what was mine. I wasn't about to let her use that money to fund whatever life she was planning with Jason. So I transferred it all to my new account, leaving nothing behind. Not a single penny. I packed the last of my belongings that morning, stuffing what little was left of my life in that house into the trunk of my car. Every photo of us, every piece of memorabilia that had once meant something, stayed behind. I didn't want any of it. All I wanted was to get out and leave her with nothing but the emptiness she'd created. That night, as Amanda kissed me goodbye before heading out for one of her meetings, I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a while. Her blue eyes that once held warmth, now seemed cold and distant. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys, locked the front door behind me, and walked out. Everything I owned was already gone, packed away safely. And with the money transferred, there was nothing left for her to take. Nothing left to hold me to that house, or to her. It was over. She just didn't know it yet. Driving away from the house that night, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, a sense of control. For too long, I had been playing the part of the broken husband, stuck in bed while Amanda was off doing God knows what with Jason. But now I was the one in charge. I had taken back what was mine, and soon, Amanda would realize that. I didn't go far at first. Just to a cheap motel a few miles away, where I could keep an eye on things without her knowing. I didn't plan on sticking around for long. I had no desire to see her face when she discovered what I'd done, but I wanted to make sure everything played out the way I intended. The next day, I sat in that dingy motel room, staring at the ceiling, waiting for her call. I knew it would come eventually. Amanda wasn't stupid. She'd noticed the missing money, the empty closets, and the absence of all the things that once made our house feel like home. The question was, how long would it take for her to realize? It came late in the afternoon. The phone buzzed, and I saw her name light up the screen. I didn't answer. Let her panic. Let her wonder what had happened. She called again, and again, but I ignored each one, staring at the phone as if it were some foreign object. The messages started next, first asking where I was, then turning frantic. What's going on? Why is the account empty? Where are all your things? Please, we need to talk. Each message was more desperate than the last, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of a response. She had made her choices, and now she could live with the consequences. I knew she'd go to the house first, expecting to find me there, maybe thinking I had just gone out for a drive or something. But the moment she stepped inside, she'd see what I had done. The place would feel hollow, stripped of everything that had once made it ours. The only thing left behind would be the ghosts of what we used to be. I imagined her walking through the empty rooms, realizing just how thoroughly I had erased myself from her life. Her first instinct would probably be to call Jason. Maybe she'd run to him for comfort, try to spin the story in her favor. But it didn't matter. Nothing she said could undo what she had done, and no amount of running to Jason could fill the void I had left behind. Part of me wondered if she'd feel anything, guilt, regret, even anger. But another part of me suspected she'd only feel sorry for herself, sorry that her carefully crafted lie had come crashing down. Either way, I didn't care anymore. I was beyond caring. All that mattered was that I was free. That evening, as I sat in the motel parking lot, watching the sunset over the highway, I finally let myself breathe. It was over. Amanda had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it, alone. I thought about confronting her. Part of me had wanted that final showdown, the dramatic moment where I'd throw her betrayal in her face, let her know that I knew everything. But in the end, it didn't seem worth it. What would it change? She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with anymore, and no confrontation would bring her back. This way was cleaner. She wouldn't get the satisfaction of seeing my pain, wouldn't get the chance to justify what she had done. She'd just have to deal with the aftermath, with nothing to show for her lies but an empty house and an empty bank account. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need to see her tears. All I needed was to walk away. The next morning, I decided it was time to move on, for good. I had stayed long enough, lingering just to witness the aftermath in my mind. There was no point in sticking around any longer. I had taken everything that mattered to me, everything she hadn't already destroyed, and drained the account we had shared. Now it was just a matter of walking away and letting Amanda deal with the wreckage. But before I left, I took one last drive past the house. I don't know why. Maybe it was to give myself closure, or maybe a small part of me wanted to see if Amanda had come home yet, to see if she'd realized what I had done. Either way, I found myself pulling up to the curb, staring at the place that used to be our home. The driveway was empty, which meant she wasn't there. Or if she was, Jason's car wasn't parked out front like I half expected it to be. I couldn't help but wonder if she was with him, trying to piece together her next move. But I wasn't interested in sticking around to find out. I stepped out of the car and approached the house. The door was locked, but I still had my key. I slipped it into the lock, twisting it slowly, the click of the tumblers feeling oddly final. As I stepped inside, I was hit with a wave of memories, good ones, bad ones, all of it flooding back in an instant. But none of it felt real anymore. The house was just a shell, empty like our marriage had become. I wandered through the rooms, checking everything one last time. My side of the closet was bare, the drawers emptied, the walls missing the pictures we once proudly displayed. I had taken care to remove every trace of myself, and now the house felt even more hollow than it had the first time I walked out. As I made my way to the kitchen, something caught my eye on the counter. It was Amanda's phone, sitting there, unlocked, with a string of messages from Jason flashing on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the phone like it was some kind of trap. But curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, scrolling through the messages. They were exactly what I expected, Jason asking where she was, why she hadn't called, wondering what was going on. There was nothing explosive in the texts, nothing that would change what I already knew. But still, seeing them made everything feel that much more real. I put the phone down, leaving it right where I found it. I wasn't going to snoop any more than I already had. I didn't need to. Whatever life she had with Jason wasn't my concern anymore. Before I left, I walked through the living room one last time. There was a picture of us on the mantel, taken on our wedding day. We were both smiling, arms around each other, caught in a moment of pure happiness. It felt like a lifetime ago. I stood there for a minute, just staring at it, wondering how we had gotten from that day to this one. Then, without a second thought, I took the picture down, placed it face down on the table, and walked out of the house. I didn't lock the door behind me. Let Amanda figure it out when she got home. As I got back in the car and drove away, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to look back for. Driving away from that house for the last time felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. The further I got from it, the lighter I felt. I hadn't realized just how much I had been holding on to, how much of that place, of Amanda, had been suffocating me. Now, with every mile that passed, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I didn't have a plan for where I was going. All I knew was that I wasn't coming back. I had packed everything I cared about, drained the account, and left her with nothing but the shell of what we used to be. Whatever she did next, whatever her and Jason's future looked like, it wasn't my problem anymore. I thought about what Amanda must be feeling right about now. She'd come home eventually, probably still thinking she could smooth things over, that whatever this was between her and Jason could stay hidden. But when she opened that door and walked into the empty house, she'd know. She'd see the stripped-down rooms, the empty closets, the joint account balance reduced to zero, and realize that I knew everything. And by then, I'd be long gone. Maybe part of me wanted her to suffer. Maybe I wanted her to feel the pain, the betrayal, that had gnawed at me since the hospital. But the more I thought about it, the less I cared. Let her deal with it. Let her face the consequences of her lies and her affair. I wasn't sticking around to watch the fallout. For years, I thought Amanda was my partner, my best friend. We had built a life together, or at least, I thought we had. I loved her, trusted her, and believed that she had my back the way I had hers. But it turns out, I was wrong. While I was laid up in the hospital, vulnerable and dependent on her support, she was out with someone else, betraying everything we'd built together. I had every right to confront her, to blow up our marriage in a storm of accusations and anger. But that would have given her the power, the chance to explain, to justify, to try and make me feel like I had a part in her betrayal. And I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. No, I took a different path. Quietly, efficiently, I took back everything I had put into our life, leaving her with nothing but the guilt of her actions. I thought about Jason, too. Whoever he was, I doubted he had any idea what kind of person Amanda really was. Maybe he thought she'd leave me for him, that they'd start a new life together. Maybe they'd even get away with it. But that wasn't my concern. I didn't care what happened between them now. All I cared about was that I was free. As I pulled off the highway into a rest stop, I glanced at my phone. No missed calls. No new messages. Amanda had stopped trying to reach me hours ago. Maybe she was already figuring out that this wasn't just some misunderstanding, that I wasn't coming back. I imagined her sitting there, realizing that her safety net was gone, that the life she thought she could juggle between me and Jason had crumbled. I parked the car, stepped out, and leaned against the hood, taking in the cool evening air. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I had done what I needed to do, and now, I could move on. I didn't know where I was headed next. There was no grand plan, no big vision for the future. But that was fine. I didn't need one. All I needed was the knowledge that I had left her behind, with nothing. And that was more than enough. How would you react if you found out your partner cheated while you were in the hospital? Would you confront them or take revenge quietly?